This is the story of how I died. Oh, don't worry, it's a fun story, and it's not even really about me. See, it's a Nuzlocke.
A set of self-imposed challenges, including only catching the first Pokemon on each route, and if a Pokemon faints, it dies.
Well, actually, it's a hardcore Nuzlocke.
A set of self-imposed challenges, including no using any items in battle, no overleveling past the gym leader's Acemon, and only using set battle style.
And to top it off, I decided evolution is for chumps. So I'll only be using Pokemon that don't have an evolution line. So that leaves these Pokemon. Well, not really. Some of these are found on the same route, so I'll only get to catch the first one I encounter. And for some reason, Roselia, Zangoose, and Lunatone aren't an Emerald, so the list looks a little bit more like this. And that leads us to the start of the Nuzlocke. Watson's Gym.
Zimic. Watson is the third gym leader. If you want to keep the integrity of this Nuzlocke, shouldn't you start with the first one? Roxanne.
You are not wrong. So anyway, the run starts off in Dewford, home of Brawly, the second gym leader, where the first catchable Pokemon Sableye is. I named mine Tiny. Pokemon that don't evolve are pretty straightforward. There's two main categories, gimmicks and fan art fodder. And sometimes they're both. Sableye falls into the gimmick category. His Dark Ghost has 0 weaknesses until Fairy's introduced. More importantly, he also has 3 immunities. Normal, fighting, and psychic moves can't touch him at all. Guess what the only types of offensive moves that are used in Brawly's gym are? I'll give you a hint, it's normal, fighting, and psychic.
I did unholy things to the competition in there.
Which brings me back to the beginning, where I'm standing at Watson's gym. This fight is actually the hardest in the entire run. Ordinarily, Watson is a run killer. Here he's the Grim Reaper. I've added Zapepi, the Minun, and Melanie, the Illumise, to my party. These 3 are the only Mons I have access to. Minun has access to Encore, which is the key to the Watson fight. Zapepi also has the added bonus of being a Pika clone, but that's not really important. What is important is Melanie. This little bug will become the greatest star of the team, taking it to heights never seen before. But right now, she's kinda useless. Anyway, as you might have guessed from my team of an intangible gremlin, a small mouse, and the girl next door of bugs, I'm sorely lacking firepower. As it stands, my biggest offensive threat to the electric-type gym is a Minun whose biggest damage move is Spark, an electric-type move. Hopefully you've started to see the problem. Watson's first Pokemon is Voltorb. This thing is dangerous because it knows how to use self-destruct. It's a literal time bomb, and the only one that can fight it without risk of being obliterated every turn is Tiny. You know, because he's immune to normal type moves. Now here's the problem. I need Tiny to not be paralyzed so I can cheese Watson's ace Pokemon Manectric later. But Watson's AI, and actually almost every trainer AI in Pokemon Emerald for that matter, loves using status moves. Status moves like Thunder Wave, which have 100% accuracy and will always leave the target paralyzed unless it's immune to the move, and I'm not immune to the move. The good news is only Magneton and Manectric have Thunder Wave, so I don't really have to worry about... Oh. Okay. Fortunately, I picked up some handy-dandy cherry berries on the way to the gym. You know, to power grind alchemy. With the Boom Ball gone, I get an easy fight against the Electrike, but I make a misplay against the Magneton. I was afraid Watson would use Sonic Boom and not Thunder Wave, which has about a 0% chance of happening. Emerald and its status moves. Now Tiny is paralyzed, you know, the one thing I specifically needed him not to be. Anyhow, I managed to lock Magneton into an Encore to make him keep using Thunder Wave. Zapepi is already paralyzed, so that's hardly a problem. Fun fact, if you use Encore after the enemy is fully paralyzed, the Encore fails. I know this because that's how my first attempt ended. Watson heals and the Encore ends. I wasn't brave enough to try and re-Encore him after he used a Super Potion, so now I have to get him to use Thunder Wave again so I can Encore it. After some swapping around, including a mistake swap to Tiny, I get him to use Thunder Wave as I switch from Melanie to Zapepi after Melanie set up a wish. Hey, look at that, she was useful. Then it's a stare down between Zapepi and his Magneton. By this time, any semblance of plan I had for the Magneton is thrown out the window. The important takeaways are that Tiny was healed by Wish, Melanie gets injured, and Zapepi finally gets the KO with a critical hit. But enough stalling because it's time for the main event, Manectric. This thing is scare-y. Shockwave doesn't miss, and Howl makes Quick Attack do a lot of damage, especially for this stage in the game. To make matters worse, Zapepi only has 1 Encore left, and Manectric is holding a Citrus Berry. Fortunately, I prepared for this. After evening the odds with Manectric by paralyzing him, I swapped to Tiny as Watson starts setting up with Howl. Some paralysis shenanigans happen, but I am able to use Thief to take his Citrus Berry, which Tiny immediately eats.
This is where the fun begins.
Now that Manectric has used 2 Howls, I have him in a loop. He will always use Shockwave on Tiny. So when Tiny is out, I switch to Zapapi, who takes minimum damage from electric type attacks. Relatively speaking, of course. Then Manectric will always use Quick Attack on Zapapi, so I switch back to Tiny, who's immune. I get to sneak 1 Fake Out in before switching to Zapapi to start it all over again. At this point, time is against me. If Tiny is fully paralyzed and Manectric gets to use Shockwave, I take massive damage. If Zapapi takes too many Shockwaves and gets KO'd, the rest of the team is going to collapse. Melanie is too injured to heal. Incredibly, the RNG looks favorably on me and I managed to pull out the win, but this was by far the most tedious battle I've ever played. But with that, the Dynamo badge is mine. 3 down, 5 to go.